Hi, I'm Lindsay Sparks.
And I'm Samantha Davidson, and this is our final discussion about Amazing Grace. So the first question that we have is talking about the doctrine that is in Wilbur's heart, and what was that doctrine, or what do you think that doctrine was that drove him to advocate for or against slavery?
I thought that it was mostly kind of the sanctity of life type of thing. Like he knew the importance of like a human and how it doesn't matter. And then he even said at that one point when he was standing on the boat and showing the slave trade boat to all those rich people that were taking the tour of the other boat next to it, and he was telling them, he was like, well, all men are created equal. And so then so he kind of had this whole idea of like a person's a person, period. Like nobody deserves to just be treated like nothing.
Right. Why do you think that it's so important to have a doctrine inside your heart to be passionate and persistent?
Um, oh, I think it's important because if you don't have the doctrine in your heart and like know what's true, then you're not going to be as passionate. Like if you understand the consequences of not acting, like in Wilbur's case, that if he didn't act, there would just be all these people just unnecessarily dying all the time. And we gain that passion from understanding the consequences of acting or not acting.
I think that's right, and that's what I wrote down as well, is that the doctrine was that God made men equal and valuable. That he wasn't saying like we're equal at the slave level, we're equal at this level that we hold ourselves up to, and that led him to act and not just like silently disagree, because brutality wasn't acceptable to him also, and I think that was seen in the very beginning with the horsewhipping when he like got out of the coach and he was like, if you just let your horse rest for an hour or so, then maybe he'll heal. And I think that was just really um, showing his truth of brutality is wrong in all aspects. And then I think going back to why it's important. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, sorry, my I needed my cord thing for my
Oh,
computers today.
you're fine. But like going to why doctrine is so important is I think it gives you a focus. There was that one part when they take this scroll and they shake it out, and then the guy was calling for like a recession or whatever, something to just look at the scroll to kind of break up the momentum that they had been gaining. And he understood, that the doctrine that that guy was going against was he yelled, it was like no matter how loud you shout, you will not drown out the voices of the people. And so he was able to, because he had that doctrine in his heart, he was able to understand, people are valuable, they're made equal by God. The voices of the people is important. And so he was able to understand these concepts. So when there was a problem, I know it's sometimes easy to hear something and know it's wrong, but it's hard to know why it's wrong. And so that's why it's so important to have that doctrine, so that we're not confused. And I think you're right, is that, that doctrine helps you like keep going, because man, that road was tough. He had like nightmares and discouragement, and he was trying to break social stigmas, and he was continuously putting forth effort and continuously failing. And so I think without like an understanding of the truth of the doctrine that you're fighting for, I think it's really easy to get discouraged.
I think you're right. Like it's easy to get discouraged, and it's also like equally easy to get sidetracked by what other people are saying, because all the other people that were against the abolition of slavery, they were talking about the economy and how it's going to affect all these people, and how all like, and the one guy was saying, he was like, I agree with you, but I'm a representative of a city, of a port city. How can I go against them when I'm their representative and this is their livelihood? That type of thing is even today. I mean, that's the same type of thing that goes on today. There's tons of people who are senators and things of that nature that get voted in. Like that video of the Idaho senator that we watched for this class, and he was talking about how where you're voted in and people expect you to vote like they want, and if you don't, they're just going to kick you out and they're going to find somebody else, and then you're out of a job. And it's the same way today as it was in that video, and I found that connection pretty interesting too.
That is really interesting, especially since the concern almost wasn't so much what the right thing was, but how do I stay in office? And that was something that he never got confused with. He didn't get sidetracked with. And I thought that was like also interesting when you mentioned like being able to not get sidetracked. I thought it was really interesting when the guy came to him, his friend, one with kind of like the long hair before he cut it, and he was talking about revolution. And he was like, you cannot talk to me about revolution ever again. And I thought that was so interesting that he understood that with all of the upheaval that was happening in the Americas and then in the French Revolution, that if he got caught up in the revolution, that would definitely limit his ability for the slave trade abolition, because people would just call it like, what was it? They pretty much just call him a traitor to the king and things like that. And so even his friend brought up that the king thinks he can see Germany through his binoculars. His king's insane, but he still stood by his oath to the king, saying, no, I'm supporting the king. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think that also is kind of, like I wish I had my articles of faith memorized, but the one that talks about how, we believe in being subject to kings, president, magistrates, rulers, and he kind of had that same ideal. It's like, I can have my own beliefs, but I'm still going to be respectful and still going to be subject to the king because he's the king.
That is so true. I didn't even connect it to the articles of faith. That's great. Okay, so I think we covered that one pretty well. The next question was, how did Wilber employ the theoretical approach to become a more effective advocate? Identify at least one thing in each system and be specific. So how about we just each talk about one thing?
Okay. Do you want to start with the microsystem then, and then I'll do meso and...
Perfect, yeah. With microsystem, I actually found 3 of these. The first one was when he speaks out in the courthouse. That's like a community effort where he is advocating against slavery inside a courthouse with people who can change that policy. The second one was his family. As he was married, he was focused that his effect on the home was important to him. That's why he ended up defeating his addiction to opium, was because he didn't want it anymore. He had a wife and he had a little one on the way, and he wanted to be a part of his son's life. And so that was another way that he was an advocate. It wasn't for slavery, but it was an advocate for the importance of life, I think. And then the third one was also within the community. He fed the beggars that came to his house, and he fed the people who brought everybody, and he gave the beggar without any legs a coin and things like that. So he was very charitable as well, and I think that was another way that he advocated within the microsystem.
Okay, and the mesosystems, which is how the microsystems interact, like peers and media, which is kind of the one that I kind of focused on, because, media in this time is not like media in our time. It's like newspapers and journals and writings and things of that nature. And so he sent out a lot of writings about, his belief and stuff like that. And his wife, before they got married, she was talking about how, but they took that walk in the park, and he was telling her, and they were trying to find something to argue about so that his cousin and his cousin's wife would, be angry or, whatever. And so then she was telling him, and they were talking about how, they had a lot of the same beliefs and a lot of the same ideas and things of that nature. And then another time when when she was over at his place at night, and she was talking about how when she was 14 she stopped using sugar in her tea, and and I thought that was really interesting. And then she also, because she had talked before about how she had read all of his things and just like really, just relished in what he was trying to do. And she was saying that because of this, she started telling her friends that, what did she say? She said that in each cube of sugar, there's a drop of slave blood in it, like literally. So they'd stop drinking, they'd stop taking sugar with their tea. So I thought that was kind of interesting, like a little meso system of like how the media had affected her and how it affected with her peers and things of that nature. So that was one that I kind of like latched onto and thought was really kind of funny, but still really important.
Yeah, no, I didn't even think about that one, but you're right. Like when it got to the media section, I was like, I don't even know. But you're right, it would be more of like the writings and everything. And like with that, I think going with the peers, I think my favorite one of the Mesa system was when he was singing in the bar. Because I mean, it was the community, but it was also with his peers, and it was a place that he met with the people of Parliament, and he stood up and sang Amazing Grace, and it was kind of a cheesy moment, but I think that was another way that. Awesome. Okay, so let's go on to Exosystem. Um, I think with Exosystem, I put in like the opposing views in Parliament because it wasn't something that directly affected like his life, but it did in the way that it was like a barrier to him. And then I also put in like slavery because again, it wasn't something that was directly inside of his life, but it was something that was very much a part of what he was working towards because um, it was against his beliefs, and also the economy of England because like you were saying earlier, is that was one of the biggest arguments, and that was a valid thing that they needed to look at. I mean, I wouldn't say keep slavery to save the economy, but that was a valid issue that they needed to work through and that they would face if they did um, like get rid of slavery. And so I think as far as exosystems go, that was the biggest one. I think was the economy of England because that was the I don't know, like crux of the matter that they couldn't get around. I don't know. What were your thoughts on exosystem? I kind of struggled with that one a little bit.
I put exorcism. I put the government in general, just
Mm-hmm.
because I said, well, this is what I said. The government is the obvious one in this situation, because he works in the parliament to try to persuade to his side of the abolition of slavery. So, I mean, the government is really the biggest exosystem that was in this, really prominent in this whole movie. For macro system, I talked about religion because in this day and age, a lot of people like, even though like in our day and age, like no one brings up religion because they think it's insignificant when it comes to law and order. But in that day and age, it was still very prevalent and important to just about everyone in the government to, religion and things of that nature. So, and also Wilbur himself, talked about how that God had found him and that he didn't want to even be, he at one point didn't even want to be involved anymore because he just wanted to sit around and look at spider webs. And um, I talked about economics for this one as well because at one point they tried to kind of sneakily get rid of slavery through passing that bill about all ships with American flags are subject to search and seizure and whatnot because of the French Revolution that was going on and so even though they were caught doing it, they still tried to do that. So
Yeah, and I think that was what I had, especially with um, the religious standpoint. Um, that was just really influential. But then I also put political ideology for slavery and the American War, and I think that was another thing that was part of the macro system was their idea of America, or the group England's idea of America and how they were rebels, and then what happened with the French Revolution was atrocious, you know, with all the beheading and everything that was going on. And so there was all of these like ideas of what revolution was, and had these like almost yellow journalism kind of thing going on with that. And then with slavery, there was that idea that it was okay because it was just blacks, you know. They weren't like us. And there was even that guy who stood up and said, we don't even have any record of knowing that they don't like this treatment. I'm like, excuse me, are you intelligent at all? But I don't know, that's how they were raised.
I'm sure they love it. I'm sure they just love it. It's like their favorite.
Yeah, I know. They can't wait to get their, like, what was it, like, ounce of sugar in the morning for food? I was, like, when he got the letter back from Jamaica, I was like, that's ridiculous. Oh, let me go ahead and grab my earphones. Sorry, the air conditioner is on and it's really loud. But yeah, so I thought that was another part of it. But what about the Corona system? What did you find about that?
The Chrono system, I really kind of just thought about how all of it interworked together. Because that's really what the Chrono system is just like how do all these things affect the other things, and how does it kind of boil down. So really it kind of is like all these things, but then like the different combinations and then mixing together and stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of what I got too. I put down like I also put down the American War, or the war with America, and how that was causing upset people. But it's like the war with America, along with the politics and all these things. And you're right, it's just like everything connected together. Really, and also like Chrono Systems, wasn't that also like historical events that changed it, kind of like the Great Depression or something, that created this different, that created such a wide change in our economy, which created such a large change in our government and everything. Was it something like that? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah. So that's kind of what I had as well. But we can go ahead and move on to question number 3. And it says, how did Wilbur and his fellow advocates share their research? Do and share their research. And so.
I said that they like actually went on these boats and they like actually talked to like that one guy who was part of his little team, and he was black, and he talked about and he like showed his little brand that he had gotten, and talked about how and he talked about, you know, some of the things that happened and how they're on this ship for 3 weeks or something like that, right? And they're in these tight little spaces, and Wilbur mentioned on more than one occasion that they were just treated like cargo, and he was just so upset by that. Also, Wilbur, even at one point, he had made this box and like laid in it, and it was like the dimensions of what the slaves would have laid in. And like people actually went to things like when you got that letter from Jamaica, that was, you know, firsthand experience, you know, what's happening over there. And they shared their research in the Parliament, and by writing their papers. And he also talked at one point in one of their little meetings with his team about how they need to get the word out, and like I think one of his examples was pies or something like that, just, you know, get the word out. And he also, I really thought that one, I already talked about this earlier, but when he was on the boat, the slave trade boat, and he was showing it to the people who were taking the tour of the, you know, the Ritchie boat, And he was showing them, he was like, oh, this is a slave boat. Yeah, smell it. That's the smell of death. And was telling them, these are the conditions that they're living in. And how 200 people made it out of 600, because the rest had been thrown overboard or had died and then been thrown overboard.
Yeah. And that's like, I think that's something that they did so well, is it was kind of like, I don't know if I talk about this later, but kind of like the story of me, but in a slave's perspective. And they did it very vividly in ways that, you use senses, like the smell thing. He's like, take your handkerchiefs away from your noses, I want you to remember this. And then when he got the letter from Jamaica, how there's like fire and exhaustion and children and death and all these things. And then also they always had, and I think this is what helped him the most, is Wilbur always had this flair of theatrics. Like when he flung the roll out, and it extended all the way down the aisle. Things like that were just very catchy. And I think that's something that they did to present their research in a way that wasn't boring or could be easily ignored, but something that was memorable. Um, let's see, and you talked about like the smell of death. Oh, and also like he made a comment, like all that winter we rode to gather evidence for Parliament. So like some people went and talked to the doctors who treated slaves. Some people went and talked to the slaves. Equiano went and sold his book, and he sold like 50,000 in 2 months. And it said that he had done a year and a half, like their group had done a year and a half of an investigation of slavery and its effects. And so I thought that was just like dedication. A year and a half of their lives are spent doing this. And also later, I thought it was really interesting that the advocates did what they could. Some people, like the lawyer at the end, he went all the way out to the Indies to kind of see conditions and things like that. And then I think he was also the one who traveled to Jamaica. But Wilbur's best spot that he could be in was in London. And so that's where he spent a lot of his time. So I thought it was just really interesting that the advocates would really, like would go to their strength. And we'll talk about that later, about why it was important to them. And I think that answers the next question too, about like the evidence that was provided to the citizens. For those on the fence, were just like, this is the condition.
Yeah, I think the most obvious one for the second part of this question is really the scroll that he just rolled out in Parliament and was like, look at all these people who have signed this and who are against it. Does anyone want to add their name? And then like that one guy got up and was like, psh, I'll sign that, And it's just, and everyone was like, you are a traitor, what the heck, but.
Yeah, and I think that was
like that would really, oh, I'm sorry. But if you defend something like that would really sway you, if you were like, oh, man, like it seems wrong, but, the economy, but it's still wrong, but, the way of life, whatever.
And it's also easier to stand for what you believe in when you're not standing alone. Like that, for that guy, I can't remember his name, but he stood up on the opposing side, walked across, added his name, and that just created this huge stir because he was a very faithful and prominent guy on the opposing side. And then he had his mind changed, so that almost gave the other permission to. Because otherwise it's like the innocent bystander effect where they're just like, well, it's not me, I'm not going to make a difference, I'm just going to stay put.
Yeah, definitely.
Alright, so the next question is, how does the film portray the importance of working together as a group, and what has family advocacy group work taught you?
Okay, so in the film, it showed group work as being like super important, just because they all work together to be able to get all these evidence. Like you talked about the lawyer going to the Indies and that guy, and to the Jamaicas, and just be getting all of this information. And Wilbur could have never done all of this on his own. He could never have thought of all these ideas. And also, his friend that came to him and was like, let's kind of do this bill and kind of, cheat in a way. Mm-hmm. And so then you know, there's like all these ideas that came. They didn't all come from Wilbur. They came from people in the group who were like, this is it, and this is that, and this is what I've learned here, and this is what I've learned here. And people with like real experience in it were able to explain to him what was going on, and he was able to take that information and just kind of run with it. Um, So the family advocacy group work has really taught me that a kind of parallel with Wilbur is just like there's different ideas out there, and the more ideas you have, the stronger you become. The more point of views you get on one thing, the stronger it becomes. And like the more and more people that you get supporting you, it's just greater for that cause because it's just um, you'll always have new ideas, and someone on your group will think of something more clever than you, and vice versa. You might think of something really clever for the group as a whole and just benefit the cause instead of yourself.
And I think you're absolutely right. I remember in the beginning, Wilbur gave up, and it was his friend who came and was like, "Hey, come on, let's do this." He's like, I've brought these other people to help support you because it really was just Wilbur. And so I mean, when it was just Wilbur in the beginning, he failed, and even with the group, he failed in the beginning. But with the group, like you said, there were so many different ideas and perspectives, and also with Wilbur's talent of speaking and conversing and just that charisma that he was able to put it in a way that was able to draw people on their side. And also with his friend who was going for prime minister, um, he was able to pull the strings so that when they did the flag uh, the flag law thing so that it would stop slavery, or at least 80% of slavery. When he did that, he was able to find somebody boring on the opposite side to read this article, this bill. And so I think like as they worked together, oh, and also Mr. Fox. Mr. Fox was the one who came and signed the scroll, and without him, they would have probably not made a lot of movement. So as they all added to what they could do, they were able to be strong enough to be able to find the information and get all the work done. Because you're right, he couldn't have traveled. I mean, his health wouldn't have permitted him to travel that far away and that long, and figure out all these things and still be able to be the voice he needed to be. And then also with the second question, um, I think I think it also has to do with having that emotional support. So that's going to be hard, but when you stand with friends who have those same beliefs and are just as passionate as you are, it's a lot easier to bounce ideas off of and not become discouraged. Anything else?
I like that you brought up about his health because he at the beginning he was going to his cousins and his wife because of his health, because he needed to rest, and even the wife, I think her name was like Mary, and she was talking about how she was like, you know that he's gonna kill himself, right? And and so then and basically his cousin was like, he's here to rest. That's what he needs to be doing. Um, and and like he was on the opiates, but it was because of whatever condition that he had. And then, but then when he was just freaking out that one night when his wife was, pregnant and whatnot, he was just like, I can't feel anything, and I don't like it, and I'm done with this stuff. And he was kind of going through like a little withdrawal moment there because he was like freaking out and like feeling really sick and things like that. And so.
And it
But
almost seems like, I don't know too much about like his condition and things, but it almost seems like he had this condition, they started him on the opium, and now if they took him off the opium, he just got worse. But it wasn't because he still had the condition, I don't think. Because like later, it doesn't show like tummy aches or anything that was going on after he overcomes that addiction. So I don't know if it was just like the doctors, how they used to bleed their patients or use leeches or things like that. I don't really understand what was going on there. I need to do more research.
Yeah, I think it was kind of just more of a trial for him. Like he was going through this, whatever was wrong with him. He explained it to his wife before they were married about how his stomach decides to rock, and then his heart decides to come along with it, and then his lungs, they fight over who gets to be the sponge filled with seawater, and he was just like he's just really just didn't feel good. Like he just didn't feel good, and so it was just. It was interesting because you're right, like his health wouldn't have allowed him to do all the things that he was able to accomplish without a team and without the group. He wouldn't have had enough or even close to the amount of evidence and of support as he did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so what are the parallels between Wilbur and Captain Moroni that you found after reading Alma 46?
Well, in Alma 46, Captain Moroni, this is the title of Liberty type of thing, um, and Captain Moroni was kind of he was just rallying everybody. He was just running down the street with this title of liberty that he had just made, and about rallying together for their religion, and standing up for their religion, and fighting for it and doing what was right. And that's like this whole movie what Wilbur was trying to do. He rallied people who were that agreed with him, just like Captain Moroni was rallying people for their religion. He um, and Captain Moroni fought to defend the religion, and just as Wilbur fought for the abolition of slavery. They just like both fought and rallied people because they knew what was right. And
And I
Wilbur
think, oh yeah.
being like a man of God or whatever, and having his his whole connection with God and religion, and so in that sense they kind of had that connection as well.
It almost seemed like Wilbur was going through a midlife crisis before, like he got to the point where he was like, God found me, and then he was able to figure everything out, and then he was able to like relight that passion to be able to continue to fight. But I thought it was really interesting, like in the chapter 46, it was talking about how flattering words led many to do wickedly. Um, and I thought that was so interesting because going back to what you were saying about the economy, there was a lot of flattery that was going around on the other side of, oh, they don't even care if they're treated this way. Like, oh, the economy's bad, and oh, what are we going to do? Things like that. There's a lot of flattering words um, that were really trying to pull away, but it was that focus on like for Moroni, was like God, religion, family, freedom, and peace, and that was kind of Wilbur's stance too as well. Was that idol of liberty that he had in his heart that he was able to share to reach out to him. And I also thought, like, with Moroni, he used object lessons. He ripped his garment, right? He had his clothes on and he ripped his robe and was like painting it up and was just like really into the object lesson, like best priesthood class ever, right here. And and I think they also worked with God's help because they understood something that was wrong, and they were able to follow with faith to try to fix what was wrong. So I think that's kind of some of the things that I saw. Um, and then the next question is like, what is a Christian and a professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? And how can we be an effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices?
Well, with that second question and this thing about the Christian and professional family advocate, I would say that a Christian and professional family advocate really just means like having your values, but not necessarily like saying, this is what God wants type of thing. I mean, you can be a Christian and just have those values without going around and thumping people on the head with Bibles.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. But but at the same time, you need to respect people, and I think that's part of being both Christian and professional. Is just respecting people who have an opposing view as you do. And I think that Wilbur really exemplified that because he never like went around and was like, that guy is, he's doomed or he's wrong or he's stupid. He never said anything like that. He never went around and just tried to belittle people. He only tried to convince people of what was right. He never tried to make anyone else look bad. And he always used the facts to try to get people to come to his side, like of the chains and the small spaces and the smell of the boats and the things that were happening in Jamaica with the fire and the exhaustion and people dying and getting thrown overboard on the trip and stuff. He only used the facts. He was just like, these are the facts, take it or leave it, and this is what's happening. And you can't say that it's not, because it is. There's not, like, the bottom line is this is really happening, and is it right? No. And um, and he also trusted people who were with him on his side, which I think is really important in being a professional. Just because when you're trying to do something but you need to be able to, if you're trying to accomplish something and you're accomplishing something with a group, you have to trust other people, particularly people that you are working with for the same cause. You need to trust them that they're gonna do the right thing and that they're gonna want to help you.
And that's so true. I didn't think of that last one, but it was like really important, especially when like the prime minister friend came to him and was like, "You've got to ditch these guys," you know, because he was just like, "You just got to ditch them," and he's like, "No, I can't do that." And so I think that loyalty was definitely helpful as well. Some things that I found was kind of what you're talking about. He's talking about the truth. He's talking about the facts, going back to treating people like they were equals, and then also like when the guy was arguing and he's like, you cannot silence the voice of the people. He was able to always take it back to the truth, and people can tell, like they know the difference between truth and all those gray areas that were being shared. And some other things is he spoke with humor and with respect. You know, I mean, there's in the beginning they had a little bit of bantering that was going around between back and forth, and like when he was talking to the shorter guy on the opposing side, and he was just like, "I bow to you in all aspects regarding the pox," or something like that. And so I mean, he like really brought humor into it, which I don't
I
know,
like
just
the one guy that if he kept trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel, he was going to get splinters under his fingernails.
yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? Like he was clever, but at the same time he was respectful. He wasn't like yelling sedition like everybody else was, just to kind of like pull the rug underneath people's feet. He stuck with the truth. He stuck with what he believed in, and he used humor and respect as well. Um, Also, something that I noticed that he understood the opponent's side very well. He didn't just do research for himself, but he understood, who was standing where and who believed in what, and also what they were focusing on, because their major concerns was the barricade for him to make that change that needed to happen. And so I thought that was something that we need to also understand. And it reminded me of just like earlier we were talking about abortion for one of our like group meetings and stuff like that, and to understand how to best argue your perspective for pro-life, you have to understand pro-choice, and kind of like their things, and understand where they're standing and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like they worked hard and they kept moving and they fought discouragement with hope. And then, kind of what I mentioned before is he focused on what he could change. He didn't get distracted with the revolution, and like you said, he honored the laws, but he stuck with slavery and he focused on what he could change instead of trying to like be the super pill of the world and save everybody and things like that. He stuck with slavery and just didn't spread himself too thin, because I think that can be very much easily done, because there's a lot of things in this world that can be changed, but he just, chose one and stuck with it.
Yeah, well, at least one thing at a time anyway, because then at
Yeah.
the end movie when it showed, and he kept advocating for the rest of his life. For
And
different.
like prisons and animals and schools and education and all sorts of things. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Okay, so the next one was about Barlow and how um, did Wilbur exemplify her ideas?
We didn't answer that last question about being effective and Christ-like against loud, degrading voices.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, nice catch.
Um, I said that we can be effective and Christ-like just through love and charity, like through really caring about other people. And if that is your motivation and your goal, then you can be successful. Because if you're out there to, put people down or tell people that they're wrong or, that they're doomed, then you're not going to be very successful. You want people to know that the reason that you have this stance is because you care and you love everybody. And I think that that's really hard in this world because there's a lot of degrading voices out there saying that if for same-sex marriage, for example, if you don't agree with same-sex marriage, then automatically you just hate gay people or you're homophobic, which is just, untrue. You can't. There's a difference between hating someone and just disagreeing with their point of view. And I think in this right now in the media, it's kind of portrayed, especially on the internet, it's just portrayed that if you don't agree, then you hate because that's it. That's like the only options. But but it's really not, and it's kind of absurd to even say something like that. But hey, that's what's going on. And I think that as far as family advocacy, the the loud voice right now is not one in favor of the family. The loudest voice is not the one that's saying, you know what, marriage is important. You know what, children need a mom and a dad. You know what, it's not a good idea to live with your boyfriend or girlfriend before you get married. That's not the voice that's out there, and it's not the voice that's in the media. It's not the voice in many people's homes, and to be effective and Christ-like in a situation like that, you really have to be sensitive to how other people are feeling, because it's hard enough to go through something like being a single parent or getting divorced and things like that without people telling you that you're wrong or telling you that it's bad and whatnot. So you really have to not only take your stance, but love those that are in situations like that anyways.
I think that's so true. I really liked when you were talking about how uh, you have to love the people, because if you can't love, and it has to be like charity, because it's got to be pure love. There's a lot of love that's going around that's, well, I don't want to impose my ideas on somebody else. But then it's almost saying like there's differences in the world, but all differences are equal. But we know that's not true. We know that if we eat a candy bar, we're not going to, be as healthy as if we eat an apple or something like that. There's differences and they're good. Um, but there's that whole good, better, best thing in the chart, and we have stopped trying to strive for that best, I think, or that ideal, or everything becomes ideal. Going back to the same-sex marriage thing, it doesn't matter, or gender's not really important, or all these different things. And I think another thing that we can especially do um, is not get caught up in ourselves, because if we start taking those degrading comments personally, like, well, maybe I am a hater if I disagree, things like that. If we start like internalizing those things, or if we start focusing like on our self-image and things like that, then we kind of take our eyes off of Christ, and that's when we are more easily lost, I think, when we're advocating, is when we kind of are are going with the flow, and we're on this side one day and on this side the other day on an issue, and kind of going back to like politics and things like that, where a good politician sticks with what he believes in or what she believes in, because they'll they'll always do the same thing, and that's why the people can count on them to be reliable. So that's what I was thinking, that that's how you really, going back to like the charity and having that love, but also like keeping your focus on Christ, and not on yourself.
About courage too, because I think it takes a lot of courage. You know, Wilbur had a ton of courage because, you know, he wasn't the majority. And just like today, family advocacy, we are not in the majority, and it takes courage to stand out against the crowd. And I mean, even it takes courage if you feel like you're standing alone, or if you're in a situation where, you know, most people you know don't agree with you. I mean, you have some people that agree with you, and that's always nice, but in the most general, I mean, it takes courage to be in the minority. It takes courage to state your beliefs when other people deem them as wrong or insensitive.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was like kind of like when he was in the box and his butler brought in the guy with the long hair. And he's like, well, he was just here. Let me go find him. And then he got out of the box. He's like, well, why'd you wait until your butler was gone? He's like, they already think I'm nuts, you know. And so, yeah, I think it definitely takes courage to stand out and almost put your head on the chopping block, really, by sharing your beliefs. Okay. Ready to go on the next one? Okay. Awesome. So with the Barlow and persuasive thinking, some themes that I wrote down that Wilbur showed and exemplified, was reframing. He changed how people saw a particular issue, and that issue is slavery. Instead of being just like something that is just a back thought, it became something that was prevalent, it became inhumane, it became brutality. When he explained what their situations were, like when he went to the dock and he showed the rich people on the tour the smell and the stink, and how 200 people out of 600 people, only a third of the people who were loaded up onto that ship actually survived to get to the place to work until they died. And so, like, just that ability to reframe this idea of slavery was what she was talking about. And then also, he had, or it was kind of like the story of me and the story of us, and he tied it together. And so he showed like the slaves' perspectives, and he showed like his own personal values, and then he tied it together um, to show how this is affecting us as a group. We are becoming this inhumane um, part of this because we are doing nothing. We're doing nothing to stop this, and in fact, we're encouraging it by buying the sugar, which is why people stopped buying sugar, you know, when they were doing their little stand against slavery and things like that. And then one thing that Barlow talked about specifically was like stories lined with data. If, if you have to choose one, she said, stick with the story because the stories are always more motivating. But if you have stories and data together, then you've got something very powerful. And so I think that's what they did. And they did it so passionately.
Yeah, I wrote about that too. I wrote about the story of us, how there was a lot. Like, I recognized the story of us throughout the movie, because he was always trying to get people to relate, type of thing. You know, even when he was, you know, he a couple of times he's standing up in Parliament, you know, just trying to say his piece, and everyone is just rah 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 screaming, and and he's still speaking, but no one's listening because they're all yelling at him. But I mean, he even during that time he was trying to get people to relate, and trying to get people to relate on a human level. Like, the slave trade is just death and filth and, you know, destruction of souls and pretty things like that, and just trying to get people to relate. And I mean, I keep going back to this moment, but I think it was really iconic of the movie when he was standing on the slave boat and showing it to the people that were sitting on, taking the tour of the other boat, and he showed them. He was like, "Could you survive on this boat?" Was basically the underlying question. You know, he didn't say it out loud, but he wanted them. That whole thing was just to make them think. Like, people are actually on this boat. People die on this boat.
Or they
People,
can even stand the smell being on a boat, on a separate boat, you know, away from it. They weren't even on the ship,
or
let
in,
alone they are in.
yeah, because I mean, all the slaves and stuff. They're not like on the outside of the boat getting the fresh sea air. You know, they're inside the boat where it's just like all concentrated and just, disgusting, where people are dying of dysentery and things like that. And it's just filth.
They're like, who gets those kinds of jobs, you know, of taking care of the slaves? That you can't do that without damaging your soul. You really can't. You can't treat people like that without damaging your spirit and your mental abilities and things like that and just being so desensitized. And yet there was had to be a lot of people who were around that all the time just because of how many slaves were being shipped back and forth.
Well, and his friend John, that's exactly what he did. He was a slave ship, you know, driver, captain, or what have you. But that was his job, and he did it. And then when he went and tried to talk to him, and he at first he didn't even want to talk to him. He's like, no, sorry, I won't relive that. I won't talk about it. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm not ever gonna. I don't ever want to talk about it or think about it again, type of thing. At the beginning, I mean, of course, then he came around and became part of the team. But at the very beginning, when he was like, "Hey, John, I need your help," and blah blah blah, and he was like, "Sorry, no, I refuse. I can't."
And
Just
that's
because how much it
interesting.
affected him personally.
Going back to like the beginning of why it's so important to work together, because he said no, they were almost limited in that until they actually got his story. And once they got his story, then they were able to move forward as well. So going to advocacy, you know, it's important that we do what we can and offer what we can, because otherwise, you know, we're limited. That's interesting. All right. So we've got about like 40 minutes left. So, and we're halfway through the question. So we'll just go back a little bit. Let's see. So what role did the government policy, religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? And then did you see their political system being pro-family? Why or why not?
So government really played the biggest part. I mean, that's kind of what this whole movie was about trying to abolish slave trade in the government. And I mean, the government and the slave trade was, was really just the biggest part. And then people were always trying to talk about policies and things of that nature within the government. So those two were really kind of tied together. And then they tried to get that bill passed, which was basically going to be a policy that all American ships were subject to search and seizure type of thing. And that was like a policy that they were trying to enforce, albeit sneakily, but they still tried to, fight the slave trade that way. And religious freedom really came into effect too because Wilbur was able to, he like thought about himself in his own beliefs and about how he could really please God. And the one lady, when they were trying to convince him, when like his team came to him for the first time, and she was like, "We hear you've been trying to decide between being a man of God or advocating against the slave trade," and she said, "And respectfully, we think you should do both." Because they really are one and the same. If you're fighting for human life, I mean, that's something that God would want you to fight for. And I think that he really got a lot of help from God, I think, as he um, went through and just kept trying and getting people on his side. And I mean, in the end, it ended up being like 200 people on his side to like 30 or something like that. So the abolition of the slave trade was just like at the end. By the end, it was just like everyone was on his side, just about. Um, oh, that was the first question. So.
So yeah, along with the government is the popular vote always went out, even if it was on the opposing side that he was fighting against. And so that's kind of what I talked about, like with the government, and also how other governments, like France and America, led to a barrier that they had to push through because any claims that were made against slavery were marked as sedition, as being like a tricky way to pull down the king and everything by crippling the economy. And then with policy, the current policies stopped the abolition of the slave trade, but it was through, like you said, a loophole in the policy that allowed it to like kind of occur because it crippled it a little bit by stopping. And he said like in 2 years the slave trade, or 80% of the slave trade people would be bankrupt, or companies would be bankrupt. And then religious freedom, I talked about how like it was acceptable to take one stance or the other, but it was the fear that came through the country because of the revolution that really limited to him, and that's kind of the same today. There's a lot of fear that goes around, or a lot of like social taboos, like you're not allowed to say uh, that same-sex marriage is bad, and you're not allowed to say that abortion is bad, and there's all these things that if it's linked with religion, then it's automatically almost like written off because of the fear of, you know, almost hurting other people's feelings, or stepping on toes and things. Um, and so it was really the beliefs that led to the abolition, but it was also the beliefs of some that hindered the process. So that's kind of what I was talking about. And then with the next question was talking about whether or not the political system was pro-family. And I thought it was selectively pro-family because, like, if you were white and if you were wealthy, then it was pro-family. But if you weren't, then it was discriminative. And it showed to, like, ignore the brutality that was happening elsewhere. What do you think?
Yeah, I said pretty much the same thing. I was like, did you see their political system being pro-family? I was like, I'm sure it could have been pro-family. It didn't really talk a lot about that in the movie. I mean, they didn't really like focus on the family because I mean it was about slavery. But I said that they could have been pro-family. I didn't really think, but like they didn't think that the slaves were. They didn't really view them as people. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like even, the what is it, the prince or whatever he was, that short little guy that he played the gambling poker game with at one time, and he offered him his stagecoach driver or whatever, who was black in a gambling game, and Wilbert, just got angry and left the table and was just like, I'm not gonna play this. And so, and I think that, I mean, in that sense, I think I pretty much had the same idea as you. I mean, if you were white, then I mean, you probably had just about every pro family that there was. But if you weren't, then it was kind of anti-family because the slaves were families. I mean, they were being taken from their families in Africa at this point. The slave trade. They were being taken from Africa and then taken to Jamaica and to taken to England and things like that. But um, they were being ripped apart from their families, from their wives and children, and they were mothers and fathers and grandparents, and I mean their families were literally ripped apart, and their children had to work until they died or fell into a fire, and it was just so in that sense, I mean, they didn't really view the slaves as people, but more like property, like a horse or cow.
I think they were treated even less than a horse because you didn't see horses being shipped so that they would, have rope stuff so that people wouldn't know that they had dysentery and like things like that. You know, like that is so that would be called animal brutality. And I mean, that was something that Wilbur was voting, you know, against later and advocating for. But um, I don't remember any time in history hearing about animals that were treated that bad. And yet these people, because they were of a different color, they just viewed them as almost objects, you know, that could just be disposed of.
Yeah,
Um,
they really didn't care if they lived or died because they figured, oh, there's more. Like,
yeah.
no big deal.
Then, all right. So I think we answered all of those. Question number 8. Do you feel that Wilbur used his time well? And then how do you see him showing these elements of consecration that Elder Christopherson spoke of?
Okay, I really like this question because some of the things, like I would say, yeah, he used his time on earth very well. He started a family and was all and found family life really really important to him, and he loved his wife and his children, um, and he fought for what was right. He fought for what he believed in, and he was a man of God. He believed in God and fought for what he thought was right and what God would want him to do. And some of the things from Elder Christopherson's talk about consecration, what I talked about the elements of work, service, integrity, and respect for the physical body. Because those were the ones that had really jumped out to me from his talk. So Wilbur worked. He worked really hard. He always was trying to do what was right, and he got to like all his resources and things like that, and he tried to, and he put a lot of time and effort into helping abolish the slave trade. And then serving, he really cared and loved, and it's not just like he worked because he was in the government or but he like really cared and was trying to serve the slaves. I mean, not directly, but indirectly, he was like trying to serve them in the fact that he wanted them to have a better life. He wanted them to be able to be equal because he knew that they were people. So in that sense, he was like really serving them. And then integrity, he acted the same as home as he did in Parliament. He wasn't somebody else. Everyone knew who he was. He was, he had charisma. He's a nice guy. He had a lot of integrity, and he didn't try to pretend in different situations that he was someone else. He didn't try to be like, oh, that's just my job. I don't really believe in it. But he really had a lot of integrity. And then respect for the physical body, about how he was sick and he would try to get better, and then being on the opiates and stuff like that was kind of, I guess, like he kind of treated it like it was his medication, and like
Mhm.
people were giving it to him, and even his wife was like, I'm gonna go get you some more, because they thought it was like a medication for him, but then he was like, no, because it's dulling my senses and it's not helping, so I'm getting off of it. I'm not taking it anymore. And so he really had respect for his own physical body in that sense, that he really wanted to do well.
Yeah, those are great, and I think those, like a lot of the ones that I had of having like constant exertion, that was something that Elder Christopherson said when he was talking about working hard throughout life. Um, and then I also had leisure, and he mentioned wholesome recreation is also important. And with his leisure time, he spent it with his son and with his wife and with his friends. He didn't have a lot of leisure time, but you catch his wife calling out to him when he's playing with his son in the garden, and so like he was spending his leisure time still in productive ways that really showed his passion for life and for family. Um, and then something else that I mentioned was that a life of concentration takes courage to fight for what really matters, and that was going back to what you were saying earlier about courage and how it takes courage to be able uh, to stand up for what you believe in and to be different. There's a quote by Elder Evans that I found from Elder Christopherson's talk, And he said, life offers you two precious gifts. One is time, and the other is freedom of choice, the freedom to buy with your time what you will. And so I think, like, when, when he was talking about, actually not when he was talking, but when he was acting and advocating for abolition of slaves, and also with everything that he was doing, he was constantly working to spend his time in ways that were beneficial. I mean, he had moments where he regretted certain things, like when he had the nightmare of where he wished he'd just gone over and overturned everybody's tables because the people who were his supporters that would have helped him with the abolition years ago went to an opera instead of voting because it was free. And so he was just very aware of how he spent his time and where it was important to put his time. And I thought that was uh, a good example for me because that's something I struggle with is finding balance in life, you know, and is with finding like where I need to spend my time and what's really important. So, number 9. Anything else? Okay. So, what were some more profound thoughts or personal insights um, that came from the movie that are related to child and family advocacy?
Um, I something that like I really admired about Wilbur and something that like I kind of struggle with is courage. I mean, I really admire his passion, and I've got the passion, but not the courage. I mean, like I really believe in family advocacy, and I know the importance of it, and it's it's really just like even what Marcia Barlow and some of the other people that we watched their videos of them speaking, and they talked about how we just need to say something. We just need to speak up. Just say it. Just speak up. And I'm like, that's where I struggle because when you're in the minority, like I talked about earlier, it's hard to have the courage. It's hard to speak out, particularly when you are sure that someone is gonna, come back and say things against you, it and like Elder Christofferson, this past conference, he gave the talk about the girl who had everyone was posting on Facebook about same-sex marriage, this or that, and she posted, I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. And then she started getting all types of negative feedback, people just being like, and he said in his talk, one person compared her to a slave driver. And that's just, I mean, in this day and age, people just really think that you are an evil person if you don't agree with same-sex marriage, and it's hard to try to show people that you're coming at this from a loving angle because people just don't see it that way, and if that's really hard. I mean, if anybody has an answer for that, how do you come at something that people just like believe is a hate angle from a loving angle and try to convince people that I don't hate you, I just care about, X, Y, and Z. I care about children. I care about marriage. I care about, tradition. I care about these things because I know that they're right. And it's hard. So those are like some of the insights that I kind of had is just, and even, and kind of the imagery that really stuck out to me was kind of what I mentioned earlier about Wilbur standing up in Parliament and saying his piece and everyone shouting over him and booing at him, but he's still talking. He's still talking the whole time, and I think that takes a lot of courage. I think most people would probably have just sat down and just been like, well, they're not even listening.
I probably would have cried.
What? I probably would have cried. I probably would have cried too. I'd have been like, oh my gosh. But
like, I don't do good with that kind of like stress and contention and those negative feelings and things like that. And so when you mention like having the courage is like I totally understand. And I think it was like I remember whose talk, it was one of the talks that we read this semester, and he was talking about how we can't properly explain the necessity for marriage to be between a man and a wife without explaining, the creation and the fall and the resurrection. Because
Mhm.
if we don't have this, I mean, without that circumspect aspect, it really is. If we're just focused on this life, and if we believe that there is nothing else after this life,
It
then
matters.
yeah, it wouldn't matter, and it would totally make sense to call somebody like that a slave driver. Not really, even then. But like that kind of thing of just understanding where they're coming from, and that's where I struggle with is I can do it better on like a one person kind of conversation, but I don't know how to do it otherwise, because my beliefs are based on religion and my perspective is based on my religion, and so I don't know how to, and I don't think it should be separated, but I don't know how to present that in a way that is also respectful, you know?
Yeah, especially when nowadays people just don't want to hear it. If you have anything to say about the Bible, if you have anything to say about anything having to do with religion, people don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They just think that, and so many people just throw that separation of church and state back at in your face. But it's like separation of church and state doesn't mean that you can't have religious beliefs that help you to make moral decisions. I mean, that's separation of church and state means that a church cannot run any part of the government.
Or
That's
that the government can't create a church,
right,
like a
right,
church,
and
yeah.
like we can't impose through the government any sort of religious belief. That's what separation of church and state means. It doesn't mean that me as a Christian or me as, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that I can't use my moral judgment that I get from my religion to make decisions that I know are right for, the government.
And that's why we have laws against murder. That comes from a Judeo-Christianity understanding, a moral standpoint. And so I think that's kind of like the thing is it's kind of like going back to scientists. A lot of scientists have that. Well, you can't just have faith. You have to have like all these experiments. If you take like their scientific theory all the way back to the beginning, you have to have faith that the first proposition is right, because otherwise, like gravity, you have to believe that there is gravity to understand, all these things, because what happens if there isn't, so there's just, I don't know, there's all these things where once you take it back to the roots of our laws, it is all based on moral judgment. And so, if my moral judgment is also aligned with a religion, that doesn't mean that I'm brainwashed because my religion gave me this moral judgment. It means that I've chosen this religion because it aligns with my moral judgment. And it's that moral judgment that makes me motivated to speak out about my beliefs of what's right and wrong morally, because that is something that we need as a society if we're going to stand.
Yeah, we talked about brainwashing in my last group in one of the discussion boards. Remember the two videos about the little girls and they were speaking out about family, and in our little discussion board about that, we talked about brainwashing, and brainwashing is like when people deprive you of like food and shelter and regular sustenance in order to get you to believe a certain way, and it's basically kind of a torture technique to get you to change your beliefs, and that's brainwashing. Brainwashing doesn't mean that you teach someone a belief and then they choose to believe it. That's not brainwashing. And like a lot of those little girls, it's like they they believe that because did their parents teach them? Of course they did. They're little girls. But at the same time, I mean, they still choose to believe it. I mean, the one girl was only 11. I think the older girl, she said she was like 14 or 15 or something like that. But but they both believed it. They both had, a testimony of it, or I mean, you can't say that someone is just brainwashed because they believe differently than you. I mean, I can go around and say that other people are brainwashed because they believe differently than me, but people would be like, "What? I'm not brainwashed. I'm a free thinker. I believe stuff," and I'm like,
But see, like that's the problem, I think, is they don't see those children as being able to be capable of thinking for themselves. That's this misunderstanding of what children are is leading to a lot, or what affects children is leading to a lot of the problems in society. And I'm sorry, but there are enough teenagers who don't listen to their parents to assume that that they're just following what their parents say. Yeah, so I totally agree. I totally agree.
yeah, yeah. I think that like in general, I think it like even those girls, I think that it takes a lot of courage to stand up for something that you believe in, and I think it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there, especially when it's something like a moral belief that is, near and dear to your heart, something that you're passionate about, and it hurts to have someone, trample over those feelings. I'm kind of the same way with missionary work too. It's like I have a hard time, sharing my testimony with people only because it's so personal and so sacred to me that it's hard for me to put it out there, and maybe they'll trample on it, or maybe they'll put it down or make me seem stupid, and something that is sacred to me, it's just hard to have someone trample over something that you feel is super important.
And that hasn't changed though. I mean, like, even with Lehi in the Book of Mormon, that's what was going on. Because he had this vision and he saw the destruction that was going to happen, but he's like, but caveat, the atonement can save them. So he goes out and he preaches, the atonement, and everybody tries to kill him. I mean, these are his friends and his family that he's been with for forever, and they're trying to kill him. And I think it's never been easy, but I don't know where to start. And so that's what I've really learned from this class is like it just starts with what we can do at home. It starts with like being active members of our church and like serving in the community. And I think that's where it starts for me, especially as we're newly married and we're starting a family and things like that. So it's not my time and season that I can go and travel the world and go to UN places, and I don't know if I'd ever want to do that, but just being a savvy voter, and these are things that I can do to advocate, as well as just living what I believe. So,
Yeah.
uh,
I think we
sorry,
can
I think
go on to question 10 now.
huh?
I think we can go on to question 10.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it says, what was your understanding of the doctrine of the family at the beginning of the semester, and how has this changed?
um Honestly, like I've kind of had more of a transition than I think most people in our class have had, because I was kind of a person at the beginning of this semester who was like, you know what, if gay people want to get married, like how does that even affect me? I'm not going to stop them. They're going to do what they're going to do regardless. So just for argument's sake, just who cares, who gives a care? Just let them do whatever they want. They're just gonna keep whining and crying about it and making a big deal. So just, I mean, I'm not participating. That's kind of what my thing is. Like, I'm not participating. I'm not gonna have to answer for what they're doing. Type of situation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Kind of my view on it before the beginning of this class, but as this class went on, and pretty early in the class, I kind of had my viewpoint changed a little, because I thought a lot, like it is gonna affect me and it's gonna affect my children and things of that nature. One of the things that really stood out to me was those two ladies talking about the whole thing going on at the UN with children's rights and things of that nature, and about them, being able to decide for themselves. And that kind of really scared me, because I was like, I don't care what anyone says, my teenager is not going to decide for themselves whether or not that, I'm wrong and they want to do whatever they want, because I'm telling you right now, that's the last thing that's going to happen. It's just like things like that really changed my perspective on how advocating for the family really does affect, or not advocating will really affect me personally and my family and my children, just because and then we also talked about earlier this semester about sexual education in schools and things of that nature, and how our students would be able to receive all this type of information, and in a way that maybe I wouldn't deem appropriate, or in a light that I wouldn't particularly want my children to hear it. When my children have questions about these types of things, I want to be able to teach it from a gospel standpoint, and from the standpoint of, these things are sacred, and this is what's right, and this is what God wants, and all these other things, we still love the people who choose to do them, but we do not make that choice, type of a thing. And I think that that's really, and I think that that is, something that is is really important to me, because I would probably opt out of my children taking a class like that, but it would be hard if it was, a mandatory class, and then I would have to be like, what'd you learn today, so I can explain it back to you.
And that's so, like, to me, I found that as threatening as a parent, because it's no longer like that didn't even used to be taught in schools. It used to be the parent's job to teach the child social aspects, and that included sex, that included all sorts of different things, and so that they could teach them to their own discretion. But now it's almost like the schools are replacing the parents because the parents aren't at home. And I'm like, whoa, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. I was like, that's my plan, and hopefully that all works out, so that we can do that financially. But I'm like, I want to teach my children the way that I want to teach my children. I was like, that's, as a parent, that's my right. And so for them to say that parents can't opt out of this, and that their children have to be exposed to these things, that, it was talking about how masturbation is good and all these things. I was like, no, in my belief, that's not what I believe. And so I totally agree that that was one of the things that I realized was so important to be aware of, so that I could, like, actually protect my family from such of those things. But oh, sorry, go ahead.
Another thing that I kind of touched on too was, remember the article that we got, and it was kind of silly, but at the same time kind of scary, about that director that came out and said that he thinks that brothers and sisters should be able to marry if they can't have kids or whatnot. And I was like, you know what? Honestly, if you're going to go around preaching, love is love, you can't stop people that want to do that either, And it's like, if they're not hurting kids, who's they hurting? But I mean, and I mean, if I was gonna be on this side of love is love, I would have to agree with him. You can't pick and choose between things. You can't just be like, oh, I support same-sex marriage because love is love. But brother and sister getting married, that's just disgusting, and no way. You can't do both. You can't decide that you want one and then not the other. And that's just kind of what I see as a slippery slope. Is right now marriage is between a man and a woman in most states. But but it's a slippery slope. Next thing you know, we're going to have all types of people wanting to marry all types of things, or, whatever. And how can you say no? How can you say no?
You can't. And that's the thing is like, that's why it was so crazy to me, because here in Arkansas, we just moved to Arkansas because my husband's going to grad school here. But here in Arkansas, one of the judges, the Supreme Court judges in the state of Arkansas, overruled the vote that just occurred against same-sex marriage, and started out handing out marriage licenses to people. Like he was overvoting everything that the people was saying that the people were saying. And this didn't happen just in Arkansas. This happened in 7 other states in the past 3 or 4 years, where judges have overstepped their bounds, in my opinion, and have overstated by saying that it was unconstitutional. And so because they deemed this unconstitutional, they drowned out the voice of the people. And so that was like another thing that I saw where I was like, you know what? I was like, I at first thought when I heard this story, people were calling for him to be impeached. I was like, you guys are very a little crazy, you know. But if he's abusing his power, you know,
Push his
to
own ideas or political agenda.
uh-huh, exactly. If he's going to be abusing his power to do that, then he should not be in that position. And so I think that was another thing that just pushed me to be more aware of what's um, going around in our community, because I think that was one thing that really stuck out to me, is that I need to at least be aware of what's going on so that when voting comes up and things like that, I can make sure that I'm voting. And then one thing that else that stuck out to me was that it was a quote by Sister Beck, and it said, "Mothers need not fear. When mothers who know who they really are, who God is, and have made covenants with Him, they will have great power and influence for the good of their children." And I think that was like the comforting thing for me, was like, you know, as long as I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do, Heavenly Father is going to provide a way. It's just like with Nephi. If we are, I will go and do, He's going to provide a way for us. We just have to stay close to Him. So, really quick, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think we covered it.
Okay. Number 11 is talking about picturing your spouse and children current or future, and write down some thoughts about how they will benefit from you taking.
I wrote that they will benefit in the fact that I have a greater testimony of the family, and that I will be able to share that testimony with them, and that I can teach them more about the importance of family. I also said that they will benefit in the fact that I will remain aware of policies and of laws that are being passed in our state and in our country, and that I will also be aware of the importance of men and women and their specific divine nature and identity, and that I will teach them the importance of it. I also said that I'll teach them the importance of equality between men and women, all with they are equally important with different responsibilities. Um, and I also talked about how, in general, they will be able to have a greater knowledge of, how to stand up for what is right and what we can do as a family to show other people what's right.
And I think that's wonderful. I think that goes along with what I've learned a lot, as well as it's really given me a stronger foundation, you know, of for my testimony of the family, and the importance to act and to speak and to help say things that are true, to share the gospel, and to spread that doctrine. And that'll help my spouse by offering support and truth, and sharing my learning with him, and it allows us to be closer to God as we discuss the things that I've learned in this class. And as far as my children, it helps me to provide with them a good example, and has taught me how to teach them respect for laws and other people's opinions, but also having a firm belief on their testimony, and also to give them skepticism while reading research. I think that's something that is definitely needed in today. There's a lot of things that are floating around on the internet that are not true, but people call themselves doctor and they're actually, got a PhD in like acupuncture or something like that. You know what I mean? And so it's just really good to have kind of like a skeptical eye when you're looking at new information. And it's good to, because like all truth can lead you back to, like all truth is connected and all truth will lead you back to God. Because God is truth. And so if it doesn't, I don't know, I'm just like trying to figure out how things fit together. And then also, when I advocate for the family. I show what I view as important and how I live my life. I show what I view as important, and I really want my spouse and my children to know that they can make a difference. Um, and so they can, like, especially their children, is we teach them how to stand for what they believe in. Not only does that help them be strong, but that also helps the cycle continue so that we are raising the next generation in a way that they're able to combat the new things that will be coming up that will be advocating for. Stuff like that.
Awesome.
So I think, is that everything?
All right. Well, it's been a good final, Sister Lake. We love you.
Thanks for the semester. It's been so great.
Yeah, thanks for a wonderful semester, Sister Lake.
Have a good summer.